All right, so hopefully you saw all we had were pennies, right? So, but really what our variable is going to represent is not just the word pennies, but it's going to represent the number of pennies. So the number of pennies. And then the other type of coin we had was quarters. So in this case, all we had was quarters and pennies. So the number of pennies is my x, and the number of quarters is my y. So important that we do that first. We must identify our variables and be specific as we do so. So now this is where it really gets a bit more challenging. We need to create two equations that represent what we're talking about. So what I want to help you understand is that we really have two different types of equations here. The first type of equation that I like to talk about is called the quantity equation. Quantity. That means counting up how many we have. Well, that actually stems or comes right from what we just talked about, the quantity. So if I asked you what's the quantity of pennies, that's the number of pennies. So all I have to say right there is x, because x is the quantity of pennies. That's the number of pennies. And then what if I said the quantity of quarters? Well, the quantity of quarters is just y. So if I take those two and I add them together, what should that add up to? This is why we needed the fact reveal back on the first page. That should add up to my total number of coins right here. So x plus y should add up to 1,400, because all the pennies plus all the quarters are going to add up to that total number of coins. So that's our quantity equation. Next, you have to think about what's called the value or the cost equation. The value or the cost equation. So we think about a penny and you ask yourself, what is the value of a penny? So if you don't know, back up here, you can remind yourself a penny is worth 1 cent and a quarter is worth 25 cents. Okay. So that's the value of our pennies and the value of our quarters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the value of a penny, aka 1, and I'm going to multiply it by the number of pennies we have. 1 times x is how we're going to kind of communicate the value of our pennies. And we're going to do the exact same thing with our y's. We're going to take the value of our y's, of our quarters, okay, and multiply it times y. So 25 cents times each of my quarters, add those together. And now here's where you've got to be very, 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 very careful, because a lot of people will simply write down, oh, it gave me $62. That's true, except you got to be careful, because right here we were talking in cents, and then all of a sudden I wrote down dollars. There's a big difference between cents and dollars. So we have to stay consistent. So instead of writing down $62, let's convert $62 into cents. And basically, with that, all we have to do there is multiply that by 100, put two extra zeros on the end. So now $62 is 6,200 cents. So we've now created our two equations. And that's probably the hardest part, but the most important part. What we're now going to do is choose one of these equations, and we're going to isolate, that means get by itself, one of the variables. So the equation that I'm going to choose in this particular case is I'm going to choose the top one. That's pretty easy. We're going to choose the top one, okay? And I'm simply going to get x by itself. But let's first rewrite our top equation. So our top equation is x plus y equals 1400. And if I want to get that x by itself, all I have to do is subtract the y to the other side. That gets x by itself. So now what we know is that 1,400 is equal to x. All right. 1,400 minus y, 1,400 minus y is equal to x. That's so, so important. So on the next line, I want you to write that down just off here to the up here to the top right hand corner. So x is actually equal to 1,400 minus y. That's a very, very important statement, because if we know what x is equal to, we can now come back to the second equation. Let's rewrite him. 1x plus 25y equals 6,200. And what we can do is we can take our new expression, 1,400 minus y, and because that's x, we can plug it in right here. So it's basically like a sports substitution where one player comes off the field and a new player comes onto the field in his or her place. So instead of writing 1x, what we can now do is we can write 1,400 minus y. All right, that essentially just took the place of 1x. And now we can rewrite whatever else is left. So plus 25y equals 6,200. So hopefully you're seeing what's happening here. We basically took x off the field. X left the field and he was replaced by this guy right here, 1,400 minus y, because that's what x is equal to. That's a really important concept. So now let's do some simplification. I have 1,400 minus y plus 25y equals, oops, forgot the y, 25y equals 6,200. I have some like terms, the negative y and the 25y. That gives me positive 24y. So I now have 1,400 plus 24y equals 6,200. Now I need to get the y term by itself. I'm going to subtract the 1,400 over. So subtract 1,400 over from both sides. All right. And I'm going to be a little honest with you. These numbers are big, but it's okay. I'm helping you through it. So we have 24y equals, think about what 6,200 minus 1,400 is. If you were to just take away 1,000, that would be 5,200. Then take away another 400. You're left with 4,800. All right, so if you needed a calculator for that one, or just write it off to the side, that's okay. Now, last but not least, we get rid of multiplication by dividing. 24 on both sides. Think about that for a second. We should be able to get that one without a calculator. 24 goes into 48 two times, and then 2 zeros left over. What does this stand for? What does this actually mean? Well, go back to this slide. Y stood for the number of quarters. So we come back and we say, hey, that's my Y. So I have 200 quarters. We just figured out how many quarters there were. 200 quarters. However, we still don't know how many pennies there are, but it's not that bad. What we can now do is take it back to our expression that we created earlier. Remember this expression right here? X equals 1,400 minus y. Well, now we know what y is. It's 200. So we can plug it in. We can just plug a 200 right there. So we can say that x equals 1,400 minus, instead of y, minus 200, which equals 1,200. So here's what actually happens. Our solution, we present our solution as a point. And I'm going to talk more about that. But really what's about to happen is we have to express this actually in context as well. So x comma y, this is x, this is y. But in the context of our problem, what we now can conclude is that we have 1,200 pennies and 200 quarters. There's our final answer. That's what we were trying to figure out from the very beginning. Such an important component of today's lesson. So rewatch that, stop it, rewind it, ask each other questions, check in with each other, see how you're doing. Keep working hard.